Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Hope you're having a good day. It's a nice day here. Um, for those of us here in the United States, this is what we call Memorial Day to remember the sacrifice of all those who died for freedom and the opportunity we have to enjoy our freedoms. And so we remember those who are the fallen. And yesterday was the Lord's Day, and we conducted a memorial service then to remember what Jesus did. Yeah, in this case, Jesus was the fallen. And we remember Jesus and we memorialize him on the first day of the week. All right, the title of the lesson today is Do Your Own Thing. Just how often have we heard this phrase? Well, I would imagine most of us have heard it quite a bit. I mean, sometimes we see it in advertising and we hear people say it all the time. And it seems like most people in this world live by this mantra. But let's be blunt here with some brutal honesty. Go ahead and do your own thing, but you might go to hell doing so. See, sayings of each generation come and go. I mean, the Christian must be aware of slogans and phrases and what they really mean and what are implied by the statements that it carries along with such. See, to be ignorant of what it actually means or the meaning behind it, and you say it anyway, I mean, these word groupings, it's not enough. For Jesus says we will be judged on our idle words also. So every idle word that we speak, and this would basically be idle words. We're just repeating something like a parrot would do with having no understanding of what it actually means. In some cases, you might be promoting some sort of evil. So that's why we have to be aware of exactly what we are saying and how we say it. And if the world is saying it, I mean, chances are we probably shouldn't be saying it. All right, so we'll be judged by our idle words. That's found in Matthew 12:36 and 37. So sometimes new sayings come along that we've never heard before, maybe in an advertisement or something, and we think, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. But we just need to see what's implied by those statements. So some new statements come along, new sayings come along, and Christians who are thoughtful and prudent, they kind of reject them right away because that just doesn't sound right, or that's not a correct interpretation of what it means. And so some people are prudent enough to know that these statements are unworthy to adopt into our conversation vocabulary. A lot of sayings nowadays include profanity, and we certainly don't want to adopt that into our everyday language. And so some of these sayings are repulsive at first hearing. I mean, like say, with the profanity and all, but yet seems like everybody adopts it, or at least people of the world adopt it, and we hear it all over the place. When we consider do your own thing, I mean, when we look at the phrase there, do your own thing, and first of all, the connotation of the saying shows no evidence of any actual standards. See, we read in Judges 21 and 25, and in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's the way people want to do it. Everything that man does is right in his own eyes. The only people who are wrong are the other people. Nobody ever recognizes their own failures. And so just anything will do as long as it is your thing. That seems to be the implication. And that is part of what we might call the postmodernism that is so prevalent today. Now, some of you may not be aware of the phrase postmodernism, but when you break it down, the main theme of postmodernism is that the truth is decided by each individual, and there's really no such thing as an absolute truth or absolute standard. So when you tell somebody that they're wrong, I mean, you have offended them, and well, that's just your opinion, and so they think. But these people say there's no such thing as absolute truth. But there's so many things in this world, and they will argue things as absolute, when they say there's no such thing as absolute truth. Like the length of a day is 24 hours. You know, there's actually people who will argue on that. They will argue about that 24 hours a day. I mean, they'll argue about that because, well, there can't be absolute truth, so everybody makes their own standard. But second and more serious is that this becomes a lifestyle for some. It is a pattern that they follow, and they just do their own thing, whatever they want to do, with no regard for others. And so to the Christian especially, this is foolish thinking. This to each his own and to live and let live philosophy has been tried before, and it is deadly business. And surely we would be foolish of all men if we fell into the same type of pattern thinking that caused God's not hot displeasure in days gone by. See, that's one of the real practical reasons for the Old Testament being available, even today, is that we might know that whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. One version says we were written for our instruction, that we might learn through patience, that, we can learn these things, you know, in Romans 15:4. So let's take a moment and look at those who did their own thing. And we will see that of the many things that we learn from the Old Testament is that God expects his people to obey his words. Exactly. And we should learn from that it's not any different today. People take God's words as suggestions or maybe guidelines, but they don't treat them as commands. And we see people in the Old Testament who didn't treat God's commands with the respect and didn't obey his commands, and they paid the price for it. So look at these careless souls that took the matter into their own hands. You remember a fellow by the name of Achan? You should. His story is preserved in Joshua chapter 7. See, back in chapter 6, God had clearly defined the city of Jericho as a devoted thing. And the people were not to partake of it, not to take anything out of it. And if they did, he said, ye would make the camp of Israel accursed and trouble it. That's chapter 6 and verse 18. Yet Achan, knowing God's instructions, deliberately took of the devoted things. He found some silver and some valuable things, and he snuck them out. And he caused Israel to be defeated in their very next battle. And when they inquired why, well, God said there's sin in the camp. Yeah, somewhere. So they started casting lots to tribes and families and households, and it finally came down to Achan. And Achan had to admit, okay, I have sinned. I rushed upon the spoils and I hid them in my tent. So Achan trusted in simply doing his own thing. And it cost him his life, but sadly it cost the life of his family and all of his possessions. Doing his own thing affected the lives of others. And what we learn is people who do their own thing, it usually affects the lives of others in a negative way. See, we also look at King Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 15, proving to us that rank and position does not necessarily have its privileges. You know, higher up you go, I mean, there's privileges. You're untouchable, as some people think. But God, through Samuel, had given detailed instructions as to the destruction of the Amalekites. But we find Saul doing his own thing, exercising rights where he had no rights at all. Saul even decided to blame the people for doing this thing, which was displeasing to God, and thus proving he was not the leader that he should have been. He was so disappointing to God that the kingdom was taken from him and given to another. And yes, the least to the greatest are all under the same obligation to hear and heed God's word. See, others also have confirmed this truth. See, the Sabbath breaker who violated God's law in Numbers 15, 32 and 36 was stoned to death. Nadab and Abihu, who offered strange fire in Leviticus 10, 1 through 11, were devoured by fire from heaven. And Cain, refusing to heed God's law concerning sacrifice, that we read there, the story in Genesis 4, 1 through 8, and we understand by implication what they had already been instructed by Hebrews 11:4. So Cain was banished from his household and family. Adam and Eve got into the same kind of trouble by trying the wings of their own understanding and flaunting God's clear instructions concerning their conduct in his garden. Adam and Eve did their own thing. And what did it cost them? Genesis 3 tells us that story. And of course, the instructions had been given in chapter 2, verses 15 through 18. So as a result of them doing their own thing, they were banished from the garden because of that. So, can we not learn and be admonished by these real examples of actual people? I mean, no greater lesson can be learned from the Old Testament than the simple fact that God rewarded the faithful and punished the disobedient, both great and small. Doesn't matter your position in life, whether you're a ruler, whether you're a king, whether you're a leader, whether you're just a poor soul out there. Doesn't matter. People who obey God are going to be blessed, and people who disobey God are going to be punished. I mean, that's just a very simple lesson. So when we hear people talking about doing their own thing, let us remember that many have done such in the past and have had to pay the penalty for doing so. You know, it is good for a man to mind his own business and not be sticking his nose into the business of others. But let's remember what Paul said there in Romans 14, 7 through 10. He says, "For not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself. For if we live, we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the living and the dead. But you, why do you judge your brother? Or you again, why do you regard your brother with contempt? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God." And so, yeah, that's where we're all going to be. You know, there was a song, very popular song years ago, that Frank Sinatra sings. And it says, "I did it my way." And, you know, some people like to think, okay, well, I did things my way. Well, this type of idea might be good to a certain extent. But when it comes to how we are to deal with God and our neighbors, it is not so good if we do differently from what is required by God. And so, yes, do your own thing, but chances are you won't make it to heaven. If you do things the way God tells you to do it, yes, you stand a much better chance of going to heaven. So consider these thoughts, and so think about these things. Lord willing, be back again tomorrow with another lesson. You have a good day today and a blessed day. Do something for God, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.